Hi everyone, so we're back with episode 3, and this time we're going to be talking about a book called Marcelo in the Real World.
I in particular wanted to do a book that centers around a character with autism because I have autism and it's Autism Awareness Day today, so happy Autism Awareness Day. We picked this book because I feel like there are a lot of portrayals of a very specific character with autism in the media, and that character is usually male, white, and he usually really likes trains in maths. And while there are people with autism who fit that profile, there are a whole load of other people that fall in different areas on the spectrum. And I thought it would be really nice to look at a book that shows someone whose experience is a little bit different. Rishma doesn't have autism, I do. So I thought it would be great for us to read about Marcelo and his experiences, and then talk a little bit about what we liked, what we didn't like, from coming from such different angles, I guess.
Yeah.
And I especially was excited about this one because I personally identified with a lot of his characteristics. So in this book, he obviously talks a bit about his autism. He's also Latino but lives in America. I'm partially Latina and I live in England. And he explores his sexuality a bit. It's never specifically defined, but he does think about whether he might be asexual, and I am as well. And I've actually never come across a character, and I love reading and I love watching series and films, that has all of those 3 characteristics that I have. So I came into it really hopeful that I might be able to connect with him. And I know that it's very possible to have those 3 characteristics in common and experience them in very different ways. So I was kind of pretty sure that he would still be quite different to me as a person. But actually, I read this book in one sitting. I started it and then I just carried on reading and didn't put it down until I'd finished within one night. And it was because for the first time, I could really connect on such a deep level with a character in a book. I'd never had that experience before to that extent. And yeah, I loved it. Of course, we're not just going to talk about that because, you know, no one really cares about how much I connected with a character. We'll be talking about how he relates to, you know, how he might relate to everyone else. But just, yeah, on a personal level, this video means a lot to me. So thanks, Rishma, for going along with it.
Yeah, and I know a little bit about autism, not a lot, you know, probably just very average sort of understanding, you know, just from things that I've gathered from, like, you know, books, TV series and so on. So I'm so excited for this video because I want to talk about how I saw the book, and then I want to see what you can tell me, you know, and I guess for raise my awareness in some way as well. I think it'd be really interesting to start off actually by telling everyone how you felt about all the other books actually that were available, because we were choosing books. Well, you were choosing the books, but when you were choosing them, you found, what did you find in terms of the literature that is actually already available regarding topics such as autism?
Yeah, this is really sad to me actually, because I don't usually seek out books that have people like me in them. Part of what I love about reading is learning about people who are different to me. But yeah, because we specifically wanted a video about someone with autism in this book, and we both read Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, and we both loved that book.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like I said before, that's an image that I feel everyone is already pretty used to. If you think autism, you think that kind of autism. Sheldon Cooper is another very similar, who I also love, but you know, I think even people who know little to nothing about autism have that idea in their mind already. And I didn't want to just cement that idea in people's brains. I wanted us to look at something different. And so I was Googling books with autistic characters, and maybe 4 came up, like only 4. And one of them was about this, kind of, I was reading the brief descriptions, and one of them said, oh, it's set in the future, and they've cured all diseases, and so that we're looking at like the last generation before everything was automatically cured, and so there's this one boy with autism. And I was like, well, autism isn't a disease, so that one was out. I mean, maybe if you read it, it was more nuanced, but as a description, that was, I mean, just a bit too ridiculous to take seriously. And then, like, the couple of others I read were, yeah, say that same profile, likes maths, like trains, is a boy. It would have been great to talk about a female character with autism, because that's a very under-discussed topic, and autism looks very different in females generally as opposed to males generally. But again, I didn't see any options that looked like they were taking the subject kind of not even seriously, just respectfully. Like, this isn't a very serious book. It's not preachy at all. I think, don't you think, Rishma?
It's not.
I think when you have a topic that's under discussed, like maybe being transgender, or maybe being gay potentially, or being autistic, and you have a character in a book like that, there is often the tendency to be a bit preachy. This is how you should address these people. This is the way that they should be treated, because obviously they're trying to raise awareness. This book, one of the things I loved about it was how it showed the way Marcelo thinks and is, without being preachy about as to how the neurotypical audience should react to it. Different characters react to him in different ways, and through that you see what works and what doesn't for him, right? But the thing about autism is people on the spectrum are so different from one another that what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another, and what upsets one doesn't necessarily upset another, and vice versa. So I don't know, we'll talk more about how the book addressed that. But
I think I would like to talk about as well, because I don't know this, about how autism is completely different for females versus males. Like, I don't know much about that. So I think if you could brush up on that, I think I would like to know more about that, because I actually don't know.
Yeah. Okay, well, Marcelo is a male character, right? So we're not gonna, it doesn't address that in the book. But in general, and again, you'll see exceptions all the time, but in general, females are diagnosed later. Girls are diagnosed later in life than boys. And that's because, so if you go back and look at when they were identifying autism, they looked at this very specific group of boys with what we would now call like quite extreme low functioning autism. Well, not, I guess some people don't like saying low functioning, high functioning anymore, but whatever, like the word works. And so they compiled the characteristics that those boys had, put them in a list, and then said anyone who meets a certain number of items on this list has that thing. And over time, that list gradually expanded to include boys who are slightly higher functioning. And then it started to include girls who are very low functioning. And just like, it's actually a very new thing to acknowledge that there are some girls on the autistic spectrum who really don't have many of those characteristics at all. It presents very differently. And one of the main reasons is that girls in general are better at mirroring their social peers.
Oh, okay.
So girls might have the same confusion around certain social language, but they're better at copying, and not in like a cynical, like creepy way. It's just that they're better at kind of, they look at what their peers are doing when they're 3, 4 in nursery or in school or in the family home, and they see, oh, these people look each other in the eye when they talk, and then they do it. or they think, oh, and it might not be that conscious, but that's what's happening. Whereas boys are much less likely to do that. So it's immediately much more noticeable for neurotypicals that something's different.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I was
So,
just thinking, in this book especially, and just in generally, the idea of sort of like people with autism, and yes, they are very rational and logical, but it is the part of like the emotions and the social aspects that is the main sort of struggle almost, right? And typically with girls, they are seen as more emotionally connected, and they are very so I can imagine that being it's like a girl is meant to be, is described as more emotionally aware and so on. So when a girl has, in a similar way to say Marcelo, autism, I imagine it would be a much harder thing. Like I don't know how that would look, because
well, this is one of the ways it looks.
mm-hmm.
So a boy like Marcelo, who might have trouble like understanding people, he might not speak as much. He might not engage as much with boys his age, and people will say that's a problem. Boys are meant to be strong, confident. They're meant to get on with other boys. A girl does that, and they say, "What if a girl? She's shy, but she's sweet." And this is something people have been saying about my whole life. And yes, I was shy, but there were also a lot of instances where I deeply didn't agree with the people around me. I didn't understand them. I often didn't particularly like them. And I just went silent. That was the way I dealt with it. And my mum would say to my teachers, she's not a shy girl. She has a great sense of humor. She loves all these different things. She talks and laughs at home where she's comfortable. This isn't her being shy. This is her changing herself in her environment because she doesn't feel free to express herself. But there was no convincing anyone. It was just, well, she's getting good grades. She doesn't get into fights with anyone. So we don't need to explore the problem further. She's not causing us any trouble. So we'll just leave her as is. And I understand why people have the tendency to do that. But it does lead to this kind of phenomenon, I guess, where girls with autism slip under the radar, go undiagnosed until they hit their late teens, early 20s, when it's time to leave the family home. It's time to adjust to being an adult from being a child where you're protected. And that change in expectation, in routine, they haven't been properly prepared for it because they haven't had the support that they should have had. Had they been diagnosed, they would have had, hopefully. And again, this is something that happened to me. You have a breakdown, you get depression, you get some kind of mental illness, anxiety. And it's because you've been thrown out into the real world where you don't understand all the rules, and you're expected to, because people can't see that anything's wrong with you. They don't make allowances for the fact that those things are harder for you.
Isn't it interesting? I thought it would be kind of the opposite way almost, because with boys, right, it's kind of like they are a bit more sort of distant and they don't want to talk about their feelings, and it's that idea, and they are more rational, logical, that kind of sense. So a boy with autism, right, who is perhaps actually really like Marcelo, is not perhaps capable of being as emotionally, what's the word, connected, right? That would actually go unnoticed in a boy than in a girl, because in a girl it's kind of like, if she's not already sort of like capable of doing that, people will be like, oh, is she okay? Whereas with a boy, actually, like
so a girl, she'll, for example, me and you, when we met and made friends, I didn't have an autism diagnosis yet. And I would kind of joke about it because, I'd watch documentaries and I'd be like, oh, I feel really autistic, but I'm not smart enough. Like, that's a classic, because again,
there are all these I remember that.
People are like, oh, Silvie, she's so quirky. But you didn't, I won't put words in your mouth. I'd like to ask you, did you at any point, not in a mean way or anything, but did at any point you think anything about my behavior, my social abilities when you first started getting to know me?
No, I didn't think of it as like something that would be like diagnosed, but I knew you were not the, what's the word for it? Typical, the general sort of, you didn't have the same sort of desires or like the same sort of like thought process almost, you know, in that you didn't really care about making friends with loads of people, or you didn't care so much about, you know, being popular, or you didn't care so much about you know, hanging out with, trying to go to parties. And then I sort of thought of it as like, oh, it's because she's, you know, introverted. Oh yeah, shy, like you were saying. And I was like, it's just not her thing, you know. It's like she's just very in her own bubble where she likes to do what she wants to do, and she doesn't follow the crowd. I just thought you were a very individualistic person, you know, that kind of thing.
And I am. The fact that I have autism doesn't change that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you didn't ever think, oh, she actually like really struggles with this. You just thought it was a choice.
Yeah. I didn't think it was like you were struggling. I thought you really just thought, this is stupid.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say I was struggling, and there was never a part of me that was like, oh, I'd really love to go to that party or like be invited by that person, but like I don't know how to do it. That's an experience a lot of women do have. I happen to be particularly uninterested in that kind of thing. But again, it's that's because I grew up not understanding people's desire to do that, to connect on that level. I remember when I moved school when I was a kid, I noticed that the kids, like when I first moved, they kind of flock around and be friendly, and then very quickly they moved back to their groups. And because I wasn't new anymore, I wasn't interesting, and they like none of their like signs of friendship had been very genuine. And I used to think to myself, I used to observe what they were doing, and I used to think to myself, I feel like an alien. I don't feel like the same species as these children. And to be honest, I don't even want to be human if that's what humans are like. And I had this thought at like 6. And that's the thought that stayed with me for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting that you bring this up, because yes, another thing that I noticed when I started being friends with you is you were extremely self-aware, but also you were very good at the information that I would give to you, you know, say perhaps about like my own experiences and so on. It's kind of, you were so good at like decoding it as well in some way, and sort of being like, oh, did you think about it this way, or da, you know. It's like you kind of helped me be more self-aware as well. And it was amazing that everything you were able to look at so objectively. And that reminded me a lot about in the book Marcelo, right? One of the things I noticed, and I was thinking about it as I was reading, is, well, firstly, love Marcelo. Like I really, really, really enjoyed the book. And we'll talk about why later on as well. But one of the things is that the way he looks at, I felt like, you know, people in the book, the characters in the book, and even now, you know, us in society would think, okay, people with autism, there's like something not wrong with them. You know, they're not considered normal, right? But I felt like Marcelo was more present and more aware than anybody else in that book. Because it's like he would look at everything in so much detail. He would, everything that was given to him as like a stimuli, it's like, sometimes it was overbearing for him. Like I understand that, and that's part of his like autism, but it's like he took everything in. He like soaked everything in, and he was so alive and present, and he would be like, oh, this is like this, or this is like this. But whereas I feel like general normal people, they're not as present, because you just take so many things as if like, it's kind of like you don't register things again and again and again, whereas Marcelo registers things again and again and again and again and again. And it's so interesting that from an early age of 6 years old, like you were registering things. You know, it's crazy that you have all these memories from like when you were 6, of you being so self-aware. I don't know what I was doing when I was 6. You know? So I thought that was
this is one of the things I really connected with Marcelo. And actually, there's a part in the book where he says, yeah, I'm feeling like a bit scared about telling Wendell no. Like, does that mean, like, I wonder what that feeling is. Look, he doesn't say I'm feeling scared. He's like, I'm feeling very unsettled. I'm not really sure what it is I'm feeling. And then he's like, oh yeah, I'm feeling cowardice. And, you know, he doesn't, and then he's not like, oh, I'm such a weak person, or, you know, he doesn't like take it, it's not this kind of huge like revelation that he makes. It's just, he registers it, he thinks about it, and then he's like, oh yeah, that's me being cowardly. And then he moves on to like his next thought. I really like that he's that self-aware, because I feel like I'm like that. A lot of the time, I'm not afraid to confront when I'm not being, whatever, you know, when I'm not being as good in whatever way as I would like to be. So as brave or as intelligent or as logical, or, you know, and I think seems to me like that's something that's quite hard for neurotypicals, is you want to think of yourself as the protagonist, as the good one. So you kind of shape everything around you to fit that idea. Whereas I hold my friends to quite high standards, and that's why I don't have many, but I hold myself to those same standards, you know, like if I am going to judge something about one person, if I do that same thing, I'll be judging myself too. I won't think, oh, but in my case, it's different, you know? Yeah, that's another way that I connected with him, because he was prepared to think, what would I call this? If it was someone else, I'd call it cowardice. So if I'm doing it, then there's cowardice too.
And I think just going back to what you were saying about there not being as much literature surrounding sort of the more, should we call it realistic autism? You know, it's like,
yes, because yeah, like I said, although that does exist, that is a profile that some people meet, it's also a stereotype.
Yeah.
So I think we should call it more realistic, like not even more realistic, just a more open definition.
Yeah. Okay, so in that I noticed that with Marcelo, when I started the book, I was thinking like he's going to be the kind of character, like for example, let's say Sheldon, you know, who even when you give him the explanation, it's kind of like, well, this is stupid, you know, and he would kind of just like, he just couldn't fathom it almost, you know. Whereas with Marcelo, it was amazing. Like, for example, the point where he's thinking about his mom, Aurora, and he's like, oh, Aurora must be really lonely to have a son who wants to live in a tree house and not want to talk to her at all, to, you know, have a daughter who's away, to have a husband who's always working. It's kind of like, it showed a level of emotional maturity that I don't actually think I think he's 18 or something, right? 18-year-old normal people even have that much, you know. And I thought that was really nice to see that, you know, it's not as if he's not capable of understanding emotions, and it's not that he's like, he feels on a very deep level, you know. So it completely sort of shattered my sort of preconception that they're not capable of understanding emotions, or if they did understand emotions, it'd be very surface level, when no, the emotions go deep, and actually like deeper than most in some cases, you know what I mean? Because
this is something,
continue.
This is something that I think the book did fantastically.
Agreed.
You'll notice, I think with a lot of characters, like in The Curious Incident and like Sheldon, they'll say, what does that mean? And then someone will tell them, and then they'll say, oh, what does that mean? Like again and again and again. What he did in this book is he didn't say, I don't know what that gesture means, or I don't know what that eye roll means. He notices it and he knows what it means, but he explains it to you as the reader, because what he doesn't know is that you know what it means. So like he's 18, right? He spent his whole life, he went to a special school that taught him a lot about this. He's had a lot of support, a lot of teaching. And just through his own experience, he's learned over the years that these gestures mean these things. But the thing is, while everyone else would have done that without thinking and also assume that everyone else knows them, Marcelo is aware that he's learned them over time. And so through his narration, knows that someone else might not have learned them all the time. So he'll say, this person rolled their eyes. That means they're probably a bit exasperated. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that is the balance that not many people get. A lot of people assume, oh, they just don't understand stuff. I read one of the comments underneath this book that said, oh, 1 minute he's only speaking really literally, and the next minute he's using these metaphors, and that's a bit inconsistent. And it's like, well, that's because as an autistic person, you can learn metaphors. The thing is, though, you have to learn them with a bit more effort than someone else. Someone else would just hear it and understand it immediately. Someone's probably sat him down and said, that's what that metaphor means when he was about 5 or 6. And now he knows it. He can use it. He can recognize it. He can understand it. But then he can't transfer that skill to the next metaphor. Mm-hmm. So I think that was something that the book did really carefully, and I was very impressed with, because again, I've never seen autism portrayed in that way, where someone with autism who is an adult and has, lived for a certain number of years in society has learned most of those things, but it's still obvious that they learned them in a different way. Mm-hmm. But before we go deeper into the conversation, do you want to maybe describe the general synopsis of the book?
The general synopsis of the book. Yeah, I could try. So it's about Marcelo, who is 18, and he has Asperger's, right?
Yeah.
And he goes to a special needs school called Paterson's, and he's been going to that school from a young age, and he gets a lot of support. He has a special interest, well, 2 or 3 special interests, which is music. And he's able to actually hear internal music, or he calls it a feeling, right? So he's really into music and God and religion. He really likes talking to a rabbi that he visits every week, and they discuss about God and things of morality, the questions of.
And he comes from a Christian family. He follows Christian faith, but he's just very open to the idea of how all faiths consider God.
Yeah,
is interesting.
And he really likes ponies. Well, he calls them ponies, but it's they're actually special horses who actually help children with disabilities, and helps train. They are trained specially to help these children, and he wants to grow up and do the same. He wants to be a nurse like his mum and help do the same. And
this is something I think is really nice. Just as a side note. This also is a little kind of, it's never explicitly stated this is because he's autistic, but I read it as his autism means that he's completely oblivious to that whole social idea that a boy will want to be like his dad. Or sometimes you hear men with single mothers saying I respect my mom so much, but Marcelo has a dad who's present and around, and he has a mom who's present and around, and he wants to be like his mom. Because because she has the career that he respects and enjoys and can see how it's helping people, because she's a nurse, right? And he's benefited from a lot of healthcare professionals, whereas his dad's a lawyer and he hasn't had much contact with that. And I thought that was a really nice touch, that he just unquestionably says, yeah, I'd like to have a job like my mom. She's the one who's guiding me. She's like my hero, inspiration. And it's not because she's his only option, because he doesn't have a dad. And it's not because he hates his dad, because he doesn't. It's just because he's oblivious to that whole pressure for boys to be manly like their dads, which I thought was nice.
Yeah. Let me continue the synopsis, but I would like to touch up on his dad as well, though. I think it was I felt a bit sad whenever sort of I read the encounters between him and his dad, and his dad's thoughts and perhaps the life of his dad. But let's continue that. So in the book, his dad, who is actually a very successful lawyer who owns his own law firm, tells Marcelo that he would like him to work in his law firm for the summer. But Marcelo doesn't want to do that because he wants to continue working with his ponies and continue going to Paterson's. And his dad also says that he would like Marcelo to join a normal school called Oak High, Oak Road or something like that. And Marcelo is so against it. And there is this idea that, you know, Marcelo actually isn't on the spectrum where he really needs the special school, like maybe some like some others might do. So he thinks that he would actually benefit from actually being around normal people, you know. And then the bet, or like the decision that Marcelo has to make after his summer job in the law firm, is that if he does everything really well, then his dad would agree with whatever decision Marcelo decides to make, whether he wants to go to Oak High or stay in Paterson. And that's like his whole summer job. He agrees to take on the job in the law firm, which is where he meets Jasmine, who works with him and is similar age to him. And he also meets Wendell, who is similar age to him, but is your very typical, I'm going to Harvard, cocky, really
entitled.
Yeah.
Always been treated well.
Yeah, always has a yacht, and like almost like a trash boy, you know, like a bit trashy kind of person. And it's interesting that you know, there are times when Marcelo just wants to hang out with Jasmine because you know, they understand each other. It's never like complicated. They sometimes even just sit in silence. They both like music and it's chilled. But the dad always kind of encourages his son to sort of hang out with Wendell, who's actually a really not a good person, not even like a trash boy, just not a very good person, with like kind of ill intentions as well, you know. So I thought that was quite interesting. So this is when we see Marcelo in the real world, where he has to go to a normal job and try to live a normal life in the real world.
And importantly, follow normal people rules. So his dad says, don't start talking in depth about your religious theories because that's not acceptable, that's not appropriate in the workplace. So there are all these things that he has to keep in mind in terms of behavior and trying to take on a neurotypical set of behaviors, which he does with varying degrees of success.
I thought it was interesting. So I'm guessing we're saying spoilers because, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we won't say that many, but there aren't many things to spoil. But it is a page turner. Like, it's not meant to be a page turner, but it is hard to put the book down. And for me, that was just because I really, really like Marcelo's character, what he stands for. I wrote a list. He's not annoying. That was my main thing. Like, you know,
what would have made him annoying for you? Can I ask? Again? What would have made him annoying for you?
What would have made him annoying?
When you say he's not annoying, what like criteria has he met for you? Like, what is it? Did you expect him to be annoying?
No, I didn't. I just think that, you know, even when we read like the other book, Aristotle and Dante, there were times when Aristotle was a bit annoying. It was like he was going so back and forth, and it's like, come on, just make up your mind, you know. And it's the very human thing to be annoying, you know, because I am very annoying at times with my indecisiveness and stuff. But he was just straight up, no hidden agenda. Everything was just clear, like what he wanted, the way he thought, you know. And like we were saying when we were reading, there is actually nothing bad about him. Like, he doesn't actually do anything bad. He's painted as such a good character, right? And I don't think it's because of that, because there are sometimes really good characters who are just not that interesting. But he just, I don't know, I feel like he just did everything right. Do you know what I mean? And even at times, right, where, bearing in mind, he's just an 18-year-old boy, okay? But I think the maturity that he has and the level of consideration he has for people and what he stands for and the values, you know, and he has to make some tough decisions. Like, what he decides to do is actually a tough decision because it could actually hurt people that he cares about. But the way he goes about it, and there is that point in the book where he's like, where he sees the letter, you know, without trying to ruin it too much. And he feels anger and he's like, oh, you know, like anyone else seeing that, I think, or I'm talking for myself, me at that age and I see that kind of letter and I'm filled with like anger and want to take revenge and I feel hatred, you just go and do it. You just act on impulse, you know. And he has every sort of ammunition to go and like, the other person is the wrong person, but he doesn't. He composes himself and he says, if I do this because of revenge, something about that is not right. If I go ahead and do this, it has to be for the right reasons, you know. And the way I just really like that. It's like he's so, go on. No, continue.
Finish your point and then I'll say.
No, that was my point. Like things like that, it just made me like him so much more.
It's very interesting that you picked up on his emotional maturity.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I also connected with him a lot, because so when I was growing up, when I was a kid and a teenager, I was very emotionally mature. You know, people would, like, I would say, I don't drink because I don't need to drink to have a nice time with my friends. And I don't want to get drunk because, you know, I don't like headaches. I don't want to do anything that I'm going to be embarrassed about the next day. And if I need to drink to enjoy a situation, then I probably shouldn't be in it. You know, like I was saying that from like 12.
I remember.
People say, yeah. And people were like, oh, she's so mature. And I was. But at the same time, you remember we met when I was like 16, right? And I think on your 18th birthday, you were like, oh, Silvie, come to my birthday. We had it in central London. And I was like, Rushna, can you take me? Because I don't know how to use the tube on my own. I've lived in London my whole life, right? And I was about 18, 17.
Oh, I remember that.
Birthday. And you literally had to like put me on the tube there and back. And like you didn't make a big deal out of that. You weren't like, ew, why? Because like a lot of people would have been. You're just like, yeah, I'll do it. Which thank you.
I don't remember that.
But there's this very kind of extreme dynamic that Marcelo has. For example, Marcelo, he says, I can't go around a city without someone with me or without like a proper map that I've been shown. And to this day, like I still like every time I'm going to do a journey I've never done before, I make sure that I've got like the app, like the like maps, like and got it's working and everything. And then I also do it the day before. I look at it and I like really like try and figure it out, and then I do it the next day. So there's like, he has some very childlike qualities, you know, like not understanding what sexual attraction is, you know, not understanding that Wendell is being a predator to Jasmine. Because he doesn't understand that at first.
Yeah.
You think, oh, Wendell's just gonna talk to her, that's fine, you know.
Yeah.
And I have this same extreme kind of, she's always been so mature, but also the older I get, the more apparent it is that I'm like way behind my peers on like travel. And it's not like I didn't feel like I could travel alone. Like when I was 16, I used to tell my mom, no, I don't feel ready to start learning to travel on my own yet. Please continue to travel with me until I'm ready, you know. She used to come, I used to have flamenco lessons, and she used to come with me on the bus every Saturday when I was about 16. She's like, Silvie, can you go on your own now? Because I'd really like to have my Saturday mornings. And I was like, Mom, I'm really not ready. She's like, just try it. And I've been making this journey for like 8 years by that point, every Saturday for 8 years. And the one day that I tried to do it by myself, I became so anxious that I literally forgot the bus stop to start on. And this is a bus stop just across the road from my house. And I went to the wrong bus stop and I got on the wrong bus.
Oh.
Yeah. And so like, this is another thing that really I could connect with to Marcelo. And that's a part of autism that never gets brought up, is this kind of extreme maturity on an emotional level in some ways, even though it's like what people have an issue with isn't feeling emotions, it's communicating emotions with autism, you know. And so but because he struggles to go out on his own, and because he, you know, struggles to not even struggles, because he's not interested in doing the things at his age and necessarily interested in, he gets treated like a baby. He gets called retard. He gets a lot of people talk to him with like dumbed down language, or say like dumbed down ideas, because they don't think he's capable of understanding complex things. But he's very capable. Like you said, he's deeply interested in religion. And while I'm definitely an atheist, I love philosophy and I love talking about like things, like theoretical things. And he has that same thing. Like he doesn't just want to read the Bible and memorize it and then live by those rules he's memorized. He really tries to understand them and think about them in different contexts. So I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like, I think that was it, you know, the sort of the two, this book does it very well. It does it very well because yes, there is that. I was thinking, wow, he's so mature. He's so normal in some ways, right? But then he'll do that thing of like taking his weights on when he goes on that weekend trip. Because, you know, and that contrast of like maturity, but also an element of childlikeness, you know, that's present. And it's the binding of two that is that he's trying to do in the real world, you know. And you know, one thing, like, I think because of that childlikeness, and you know, Marcelo, and I think you as well in somewhere, he is a strong character. Like, he has strong values. And like you were saying, you know, like how you had very sort of particular views and things you were kind of like strong on. But I was imagining, say, someone who isn't as what's the word, more is confident in the word, in their own sort of understanding, and who's not as self-aware perhaps, or who does want that, you know, sort of like wanting to be invited to that party or wanting to communicate a bit more but not being able to. I think that's this book also really showed the vulnerability, you know, the vulnerable side of that. Because before the story really took off at the beginning, when Wendell was talking, I really felt like, you know, maybe Jasmine would be taken on a boat because Marcelo doesn't really understand what's going on here, you know, and potentially maybe Jasmine would get raped or something because he's not capable of deciphering the horrible nature of like Wendell and his ill intentions, because he just doesn't know of things like that, you know. And but he had a gut feeling that he stuck to. But I don't know if many people have such, they will have gut feelings, but I don't know if many people will be able to be like, yes, I'm just going to stick to my gut feeling, especially when there's someone like Wendell who's offering you a friendship and you've not had a friend before.
Yeah. And actually, Marcelo nearly doesn't. It takes him a good while to decide he's not going to.
Yeah.
So like where he's thinking, but the example I mentioned earlier, where he's like, what is it that's preventing me from telling Wendell? He's like, oh yeah, cowardice. And even at that moment, he doesn't tell him. He's like, recognizes he's being a coward, but his recognition of that doesn't mean suddenly he becomes brave. It takes further events and more kind of learning, and for him to then think, actually, I'm at the stage now where I know I'm not going to do this. And then once he knows, he says it straight away. There's no tiptoeing around it. It's the first thing he says. He's like, I'm not going to tell Jasmine to come. And, you know, and Wendell says something in reply, and he's like,
oh, he kicks the bud.
He's like, no, we're friends, like we were once. And he just has no problem. Like, once he's made up his mind, like, that's it. There's no, oh, maybe you'll be my friend again. When it's like, no, we used to be friends. We're not anymore.
And you know what? That is it. That is what made me like Marcelo more. And that is why I think he's in the not annoying category for me. Because I am very much like, oh, maybe we'll still be friends, maybe he won't, maybe no, maybe this, maybe that, you know. And I like seeing characters who are strong, who are very much the opposite of me. You know, I really, really like that. So I think if he had been a bit more sort of like wishy-washy, you know, which is very normal, you know, it's like, I don't know, I just find that really annoying because I find that to be an annoying trait in myself. So I think that's why I really like, you know, people like you and Josh, because you're so like, this is it. And then I often have to come to you to be like, help me, you know. So maybe it's that. Yeah, straight up, no hidden agenda, so present and alive. You know, okay, this is what I want to say. This is when it like really made clear, when Jonah takes him to the barn, I think, to have a heart-to-heart, right? And then Jonah makes a comment, you do this to everyone? And he's like, what, make them spill their guts out, you know, like. And then he's like, oh, what? You know, it's amazing that someone like Marcelo, who he says in that moment, like, oh, like, I'm really not smart. If you understood how many things I don't actually know, you know, you would not call me that. But I loved every single conversation he had with another character, partly because, yes, he was so present, right? And and it was so easy for him to have this conversation, whereas before I always thought people with autism, or, you know, who are anywhere in the spectrum, are going to be people who are really sort of not capable of having that conversation in the most easy way. They'd be really uncomfortable and they'd be nervous and anxious. And actually, I'm more nervous and anxious and like jittery. And especially, this is what I wanted to say when we were reading together. You know, in the last video, like the Mecca video that we did, and you know, we had to pause the video so many times because we were like, oh, Silvie, I lost my train of thought. Oh, Silvie, I don't know what I'm saying. This kind of thing. It's like he didn't have any of that because it was just so clear. He says what it is, how it is, without everything else. And for me, that everything else is like, oh, what if, you know, Silvie thinks of me this way? Or what if like someone who watches this video then thinks I'm a racist? Or what if this thinks I'm like really dumb? Or what if this person thinks I'm like blah, blah, blah? It's like all these things is just not there. So in some way, it's like the exact opposite. Do you know what I mean?
Jonah says we should all be so ill. And I thought that was a really interesting thing.
That was it. Yes.
Yeah, because there's a lot of autism is a disability, right? And I don't agree with people who are like, no, we're just differently abled because autism is a good thing. There are a lot of things, but this is the key part, right? Autism really makes life difficult because we, as autistic people, have to live in a neurotypical world made by neurotypicals for neurotypicals, right? That's why it's a disability. But if we were in a little like autism community, I think could be a lot of benefits, and not just like because you got all the people who are like amazing at maths and engineering, whatever. But there's something very open about communication. And I've been to an autism group where people are like, I really like coming here because I can just be myself, because I know if I just be myself and speak the way I want to speak, I'll lose a friend or I'll get backlash or I'll be bullied or whatever. But at the same time, there are quite a few people like Marcelo, like me, I think, who like that embarrassment for how people are going to perceive what you're saying, or if it's appropriate to talk about or whatever, it's just not there. So actually, to very direct communication, I find this is a trick I used to have in like A levels in Woodhouse. You know, when you had that like first lesson, you kind of had to chat to people next to you and get to know them. This literally happened to me. I decided, after being very shy all throughout school, that I was just going to say all like the weirdest things about me, and then either make a really good friend or like we never. Literally once I sat next to this girl and I was telling her like all these weird things about me, and the next lesson she came in, she looked at me, she just sat on the other side of the room. I was like, that's so funny. And at least I don't have to waste my time small talking to her ever again. Like, it wasn't even upsetting to me. I was just like,
what did you say to me?
Oh yeah, I think like, remember the first time we went to Starbucks and we were talking about like
what before the Starbucks, what did you tell me that we even went to?
I can't remember if I did that to you, because we didn't sit next to each other in that first introductory lesson. It took us like a few lessons, and then we were only talking about the philosophy, right? But in Starbucks, when we first started talking as friends, I was like, oh yeah, I'm asexual. I don't think Ian Somerhalder is attractive or whatever. We did like loads of different things like that. Oh, I don't drink. I'm sure I told you I don't drink very early on, and I don't smoke or anything. And drinking was like a big part of like getting to know each other and like being friendly with each other at that age. Yeah, and I just would say that to start, and like some people just like never talked to me again, and like that didn't upset me at all. But sometimes I had these like really interesting conversations, and that's something I still do. I did that when I worked at Primark. I did that with people who worked there. Like I do it at uni now if I was sitting with people, and I have made like quite a few friends, like really good friends that know my whole weird self, because I told them that stuff, and they were like, well yeah, me too, or oh, that's interesting. We had like great deep conversations like really early on. And it got all the riffraff out the way that I didn't need to waste time, you know, like, because for me, there's no point forcing a connection with someone if that connection is not going to be meaningful. Like, I just don't need it. It's, you know, I don't need to inflict myself on them, and I don't need those little interactions to make me feel valid.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people do, and I'm not saying that, oh, I'm superior because of that. Whatever. It's just something that I personally don't need. It's not like I want it, but I'm making do without. I don't want it. And that's not in my control. I feel I'm lucky like that. But some people might be unlucky like that, you know?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a bit. There are, I guess, three things that, let me just quickly bullet point it to you and see if there's any one of those things that you would like to talk about. Because I think we've covered quite a bit, you know?
Yeah.
The first one is his father and the comment that he made on the train where he says, oh, he wants people to know or see that my son is an ... We all know what he's trying to say, you know, and sort of his perception of his own son and how that, I think that could be something we could talk about. Second is his internal music, if there's anything you wanted to say about that, because I found that so fascinating. I'd never heard of that.
Interesting, and I haven't really heard of it. I'm sure it exists, but I felt like that was almost like a gimmick because like he wanted to add something to, like, I don't know, like it's interesting, but I don't know if there's anything we could say about it.
But then why does that internal music go away?
I don't know, but let's say I don't know anything about internal music.
Yeah, you know, I thought it's kind of like a feeling, right? See, I thought I might be completely wrong, or like completely off of the charts here, but it's like I thought before, you know, because Paterson, the special needs school, catered towards him, right? And it's kind of like it didn't challenge him in some ways, like as Aurora was saying, it didn't push him in certain ways. So it's kind of like, you know, all these feelings, because he's capable of feeling, and all these emotions that you would naturally have as like a teenager, right? It's kind of came from within. But then when he went into the real world, he didn't need it to come from within, because the interactions just brought all those feelings out anyway, you know?
It's a really good point. See, that went over my head.
I thought maybe that's why, because then what's it called? You know, when Jasmine, oh, spoiler alert, you know, the end scene and the end scene, he hears the music, you know, and it's kind of like a beautiful melody. It's because of what happened, you know, so he doesn't need to seek inside anymore. Everything is, or it's like, you know, he's really in the real world. And then I guess the next point is how his father was so against him going to Paterson's. And do you think he benefited from going to Paterson? Someone like him, should he have always gone to Oak Ridge High, or should he have gone to a special needs school? Or do you think it was the right decision for him to do his final year in Paterson? What about, I guess the topic is of special needs at schools.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. And I'm not just talking about normal people here. I'm talking about healthcare professionals like GPs. Obviously, a psychiatrist or specialist will know different, but GPs are only general practitioners, right? They don't necessarily know much about autism. And in my experience, and in a lot of the people who I know with autism, like from autism groups experience, they know much less than the people with autism themselves. And there's this tendency among healthcare professionals and teachers and all the kind of people who think are in a position to actually notice and like try and figure out a solution to, and it makes sense, but there's a tendency to, if someone causes a lot of problems, so if they require a lot of extra care, they have meltdowns, they disrupt the class a lot, people will be like, oh, they need like a special place, they need to be kind of like get out of the way, you know, put them in a place that's best for them. It's not necessarily coming from a negative place. Maybe it's like they just need extra care. And that's fine, right? Those people do need extra care. But so do the people who, like myself, are not causing problems. right? I can speak. I'm not low functioning. I'm not, unable to physically say what I need or whatever. But because I don't know any different to my own experience, often doctors will say to me like, well, what do you think would help you? And I don't know what the options are. Give me a list of 5 things and I'll tell you which one will be most helpful. You know what I mean? I can't produce like solutions to the problems I don't even realize are problems and different from everyone else until just now, and I can see why, if I am not causing any problems or disruptions and I can get a job and I can go to university after all these things, it's very easy to say it. And even people with autism will say, oh, well, your life is easier. You don't need the support because you can handle it. So you may as well be in the real world. But actually, I'm in a very difficult position in a way, because obviously it's difficult if you're very low functioning. But if you're high functioning and you come across normal, then you still need the support, but you're much less likely to get it because there's not enough funding for everyone. There's not enough places for everyone who needs the support. And at the same time, people in the workplace, people in uni who don't realize there's anything, that you're struggling with anything, and even the ones who do, will expect you to function at their level. Like even my mum, she knows my struggles. She sympathizes with them. She knows I have autism, but because I seem so normal, it's very hard for her to remember in the moment that I struggle with things that she finds so natural. And that's my mum. Everyone else is like that times 100, right? I think because if you can't really see someone's pain, it's very hard to sympathize with it.
Yeah.
So if you are high functioning, like Marcelo basically is, and we don't know that he would be if he'd been in a normal school. Maybe that's just because of all the thing he had. But let's say he is high functioning, even having gone to like normal schools like I did. It's very hard to then say, no, I need adjustments made for me to be able to function in the world, because people don't take you seriously. They say, well, you look normal to me, you look fine to me, you can speak, you can get up on time, you can talk about this, complex issue. So obviously your problem isn't that real. But it's not that doing those acts are hard. It's that maintaining kind of a normal schedule with normal activities the exhaustion accumulates, right? And so it leads to something like a breakdown, or like you can't continue with this job because it's taking too much out of you. It's like, how people say if men got periods, you'd get like the time off from work every month, but because it's women, like you don't, like paid time off. It's kind of like that. Neurotypicals, like if they felt the exhaustion that someone with autism feels at having to communicate in a way that's not natural to them all day, every day, work on a schedule that's not necessarily natural to them, do all these things that aren't natural to them, they have to put on a show almost, then you'd get a week off a month or whatever to just like lie in bed and be like, I can't move, I don't want any light, I don't want any noise, I just, it's like that. It's like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other points? Because I have a few questions I'd like to ask. Do you have any questions you wanted to ask me?
No, I think I've covered pretty much everything. Well, I guess the father, if you wanted to talk about the father and what you thought of his comments. And
I guess it ties into that, because the father, on the one hand, is telling Marcelo all the time, you're normal, you don't need help, you're fine, you can cope with all this stuff. And it's kind of invalidating the difficulty Marcelo has. But yes, he can cope. Should he really have to? Does he actually need to have to cope with that stuff? And you might decide he does. Like Marcelo's father obviously thinks so. But there's this thing where in front of Marcelo, he's like, you don't need help, you're fine, deal with it, cope, learn to cope if you can't cope already. But to the outside world, and obviously in his own private mind, he thinks of Marcelo as less than, he's not as normal as his partner's son, he's not as strong, he's not as clever, he's not as natural. And yeah, it's a shame. I mean, you get those like crazy people who are like, I'm not getting my kids vaccinated because it might give them autism. Like the question, other than like, there's evidence to prove that that's not true and it's just stupid. like the question always comes to my mind, even before I knew I had autism, why is having autism worse than, getting measles and dying when you're 3? Like, why is that the big bad, like scary, I think, yeah, is it just that there's not enough portrayal? Because autism is not that rare. I don't understand why there's this idea that autism is something to be so upset about. Obviously, if your child struggles a lot, no one wants to see that. No one wants their child to struggle a lot. But there's like a whole group of people with autism who are capable of having a nice relationship and friendships and a degree and a postgraduate, thing, and a job and a nice life. But they just aren't going to present themselves in the way that most people expect.
Yeah.
So I don't even know like why he's so upset about it.
Yeah, and if he actually spent the time he doesn't actually spend any time talking to Marcelo. I realized that throughout the whole book, and
he tries to once at the gym, but he doesn't talk to Marcelo about stuff Marcelo likes.
Yeah.
Marcelo to have a normal son conversation with him.
Mm-hmm. It's like what's normal is whatever your son is, not whatever idea you have of what a normal father-son conversation is. And it's like, if you think about it, like Marcelo has a really good plan about his future. He's actually quite ambitious, and he has a good sense of like wanting to help the world. He has a good sense of his place in the world and what he can do to contribute. It's so much better than someone like Wendell. And it's like, but it's not Wendell who's sort of like looked down on. It's Marcelo, So yeah. Oh, another thing. It's one of the reasons why I don't find Marcelo annoying, like I said already, and why I am attracted to people like you and Josh and whatnot, is that you really don't care about sorry, it's like you really don't care. No, this is not bad. You really don't care about, obviously you care to some degree, like how you come across, right? But it's not hard for you to make decisions. It's like you don't have all these other people factors in your mind. It's kind of like, this is what I want, this is how it's going to be, this is what I'll do to get this, and which you don't have. And it's like this clarity which I think Marcelo has as well, that really just it reminded me of you in some way. Yeah. Like, you tell me, you don't care so much about what people think about you, do you?
No.
Okay, what if someone like, obviously you care what your friends think and whatnot, but it's like,
here's an obvious example. I have literally no problem sobbing in public. If I feel like crying, I just cry. Like on the street, on the bus, sleeping, same thing. I feel like sleeping, I just sleep.
Yeah. Oh, and we were saying, oh yeah, this is another thing that really reminded me of you. When he's like, oh yeah, we were talking about love, and it was like, are we gonna have sex? It's like, oh.
You know what?
It's like so upfront that like it's making me blush a little bit, like I just can't. Like, it's so straightforward, direct. I love it. I just love it. It's amazing.
So moving on from autism, which is obviously the main kind of part of, it's not really a part, it's the main topic of discussion in the book, is Marcelo and his autism and how he deals with it. But he also questions his sexuality. He's kind of thinking about what it means to be sexually attracted to someone and if that actually applies to him. I'm asexual, and I've kind of always known that. I don't really need to question it much. Marcelo has never thought about it. He's never thought about sex or anything like that until people kind of like start questioning him in a bit on it, like throughout this summer, because he starts talking to Wendell, who only cares about sex. And And then, Jonah, and so it starts to enter his mind. I really liked the way it was questioned. And also that it wasn't grouped in with autism. Oh, I'm autistic, I don't understand sex or whatever. It was its own question. He really thought about what Jasmine meant to him and how she meant, like how she does it make sense to say how she meant that to him? That's weird, but you know what I'm saying, right? And I'm in a relationship. I do love my partner. I love Elder. But I am asexual. Like, that's just not a part of the relationship that means anything to me, really. And I like the fact that he's asexual, but he has the potential for romance. And without being too kind of, oh, I'm asexual, heteroromantic, or whatever, without being too, how do you say it, too obvious.
Oh, yeah.
Prescriptive, but also, like a lot of books nowadays, they'll say in the blurb, oh, there's this character and she's gay or whatever. And like the selling point of the book is that she's gay. And it's like, well, why don't you just have a character that's really interesting, goes on a great adventure, and then just happens to be gay? You know what I mean? It's like, whereas this is it's not like that, where you're just trying to shove a label in there to show that you're inclusive. It's very true to him, because he does all this pondering about religion and about feelings and about what he understands and what he doesn't understand as someone with autism. And he turns his attentions to this. And so I really like the way that they explored that as a topic. And it's left very open-ended. It's not kind of, it's not necessarily, he's not put in any boxes within his autism or within his asexuality or within, and we'll talk about this a bit, him being Latino. He's not put in a box like that either. I never understand when people say, oh, I don't like labels because I don't want to be defined like that. As far as I'm concerned, labels don't define you, they describe you, and you can always be described. It makes no sense to say you don't want that description. If you change, then your label changes. It's not the other way around. And I think with Marcelo, it's very much that. It's like, this is how I feel at this moment. And I'm not saying I'm going to feel like it forever. He doesn't say, but I don't need a label. It's like, no one can describe me because I don't want to be pigeonholed. He just very much notices how he feels and puts words to it in a way that I really appreciate. Because I don't know, I guess I don't like it when people like refuse to describe themselves because they don't want people to like remember that and then like not be adaptable, and the same thing with being Latino. Normally we see characters who are either kind of like Aristotle and Dante. There's the Aristotles who are like speak fluent Spanish and who are very in touch with their Latino side, and that is a big part of their identity. Like they talk with a Latino accent, you know the accent I mean, in films. Their parents will have the same kind of jobs, that like low skilled manual labor type job, that kind of stereotype. Or there's the Dantes who like don't speak a word and feel very unconnected or with that whole part, and they're basically white. They live a life as a stereotypical white family, but they happen to have like those genes. Whereas he doesn't speak fluent Spanish. He speaks a few words. He prays in Spanish because that's what he grew up doing with his grandmother. He calls Abba, which I assume is abuela. He's got that kind of like, he's a bit integrated, not fully, because he lives in America. He was raised in America, right? And because neither his parents are fully like anything. They're both quarter or half or whatever. And I like that. I identify with that as well, because at that age, I still didn't speak Portuguese. I recognized a few words and phrases. I was very in touch with like Brazilian culture and Brazilian music, because I grew up with my dad telling me about it and family in Brazil and visiting them. But but I was mainly spoke English. There were some things I did in like a Brazilian way. Most things I did in an English way. And then when I was 18, I spent a year in Brazil and learned Portuguese and stuff. But at that stage of life, we were also in a very similar place. And you almost never see that in characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really liked how everything about Marcelo was nuanced. There was no, we're just going to be lazy and do it in a stereotypical way because that's easy. Even the tiny things like him being Latino is barely mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Him being asexual is mentioned in a part of the book, but it's certainly not an ongoing discussion throughout, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like basically like maybe a couple of pages where he thinks about it.
Yeah.
He thinks about it in such a detailed, careful way. And that's what I thought the writer did beautifully. The one thing that I would say came across as a little unnatural was the explaining stuff all the time. Like, oh, I see this, that means this, da 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 da. And on the one hand, I know why this was necessary, because most people who are reading this book are going to be neurotypical, right? Because there are so many more neurotypical people than autistic people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I assumed he wanted, he doesn't have autism himself. He's worked with people with autism. I think he has an autistic nephew, according to his own
author's note
or whatever. But one of the things he probably wants the book to do is speak to people who don't have much awareness of autism and show them what it can be like. And so it's very hard to show someone who's neurotypical an autistic mindset in writing, in narration. So I see why it had to be a bit like that. Again, like I said at the beginning of the video, it's very useful in a way to show that Marcelo does understand some of these metaphors, but he doesn't assume that you will. He thinks, if I'm saying this to someone, if I'm narrating it, then I better let them know, But that isn't the way, certainly not the way that I think.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I have learned, this means this, and then I don't need to remind myself every time. I just know it,
I see. See, I didn't feel that at all. I felt like it came across very natural when I was reading it anyway. Like it didn't stick out to me, But yeah, I guess it's not how all autistic people think. So what's it called? That could be said. But no, I quite liked it because, even when there are things being said, yes, sometimes you repeat, it's kind of a little bit repetitive in that this means this, but then there'll be times where it's like he has to be reminded, oh, it's a figure of speech, and then there'll be times where like Jasmine was like saying a few sentences, but the thing he repeats is galore. Ooh, I like that word. It's kind of like he completely disregards all of that.
He didn't always repeat words for the same reasons. Sometimes he repeated a word because he liked it. Sometimes he repeated a word because that's what he thought was the most important. Or sometimes he repeated a word because that's what he didn't understand. Like the repeating language is something that some people with autism do. But I really liked how, again, he didn't pigeonhole. He didn't say this is what they do because they don't understand or because they, just that's reaction to words in general that stuck out in his brain.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about, it's so true. I think one of the other reasons why this book was so good is because he wasn't boxed in any way. It's like, I don't know how to say this, but it's like, I was hopeful. It left me hopeful for Marcelo. Like I felt like, he could go out and, he could meet other Wendells, but have the tools to like, not be taken advantage of, and it's like, yes, he's not sure about this, but he could potentially develop romance. Yes, and him going to the Spanish neighborhood and helping the girl, it just, everything felt so uplifting, it's like, I really like that because a lot of the times, there was no point where it was like, oh, because he's autistic, he's at this terrible disadvantage. And yes, there are things that are difficult, but it's like overall the book gave such an uplifting feeling.
I
that I
think
really,
because
really
it
like.
showed that there's whatever is difficult for him now, there's always space for growth.
Mm-hmm.
I think like with Sheldon, for example, he doesn't understand sarcasm for like 8 seasons, and then maybe on the 9th he starts to get sarcasm. But like, how many people are still watching after 9 seasons to get that message? You know what I mean? Growth. So like, for all the people who just watched 8 seasons, like it might be the 8th, I don't know what it is, but it's like, oh, you know, Sheldon will never learn what sarcasm is. He's incapable of understanding it. Whereas that's not how anyone's brain works. You can learn things, you can develop and grow. And that's what schools like Marcelo's school did for him. You know, it helped him develop his thinking and his understanding of things. But yeah, you can always become a bit more open-minded. I think this is something that, again, I have really been working on in the last 4 or 5 years or so, because I used to see things very, very black and white. Like, I think smoking is really wrong. If you smoke, we can't be friends anymore, even though we've been like best friends for like however long.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the end of it. I'd be like, you know what, it's so upsetting you smoke, because now we can't be friends anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Whereas now I'm like, okay, well, if you don't smoke near me and you don't bring that to my door, then do what you want in your own time. That's on you. I still don't like it. I don't respect it, but we're not the same person and we don't have to be.
yeah.
You know,
I've
like,
seen that transition in you as a person.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. Yeah. It's yeah. Boom.
So I think that's what you like you were saying. I really agree with your point that the book is uplifting because it deals with a lot of what it deals with is quite a harsh thing, really, if you think about it, which is Marcelo, who's being childlike until that point at 18, very protected in a very secure environment, confronting the real world, confronting like that point that you said earlier when we were reading. I kind of think you should be the one to say it again because it was your idea. But you know, when you were saying how like he's seen animal cruelty for the first time, and then he's seeing all like the music's gone because he's confronting all these horrible, horrible thoughts for the first time that he's never had to confront before. He's kind of realizing this is what the real world contains. It's not safe. It's not, you know, it's not protected.
So shocked at the fact that Wendell would kick a bird. It's like,
yeah,
what? You know, it's like
the first time you see animal
shattering.
Yeah, but at the same time as all these kind of childish beliefs about the world are being shattered, it does give off this hope that that Marcelo will take these experiences and they will help him in the future. He will continue to grow. You know, he's not limited. He's not, you know, retarded or stupid just because he thinks in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. I feel so hopeful and uplifted despite all the horrible things. Yes.
As like just a finishing touch, I'd just like to say that whether you relate to an aspect of this book personally or whether you just kind of are mildly interested in reading, I definitely recommend it for everyone. I can't imagine anyone not enjoying this book. If you're someone who likes to think about things quite deeply and you just want an opportunity to ponder and consider and think about the deeper meanings in life, I think you'll love it.
I when I went out 2 days ago when it was really sunny, I got my friend to read out loud to me. And she's actually getting the book. So and she's not like interested in like just autism or asexuality like that, but just the few chapters that she did read, she was like, wow, this is so great. And that is another reason why this book is so good, because without taking away the whole like autism, asexuality and everything, just as a book and a journey of an 18-year-old boy in the real world, it's brilliant.
Just a brilliantly written like story.
Agreed.